Good morning, everyone. I'll start again. Welcome to Campbelltown Library. I'll just say my colleague Bess will do the acknowledgement of country in her first presentation today. I'll leave that one to her. For those of you who are here, I've put out the toilets. For lunch options, we've got many options in Queen Street. So Queen Street, if you go out the doors, the top level here and work your way in that direction, there's lots of different varieties of places that you can eat, sandwiches through to pizzas to anything. If you are feeling energetic, there's also a food court at Campbelltown Mall, which is about a 10-minute walk. If by chance the alarms go off, fire alarms, we have a meeting point. So if you go through the doors again up here, work your way down the next level, down one level down, and then the car park to my right. But staff will show you that. I think that's about all I need to say. So I'll hand over to Bess.
Good morning, everyone. Just while I get my presentation set up, I'll also remind you that parking is a little bit of a fun time here. Why would that work?
Excuse me, then you need to screen share it onto Zoom.
Okay, no problem. Let me go back into Zoom. And it's screen. Okay, how am I going? Is that working? We love this.
Almost? Yes.
Okay. Why won't it let me back in now? That's just rude. Sorry, friends.
Okay, want me to get
No. I will work it out. I'm all good. I am good at doing the thing because I can see something different on here than is up there. It's fine. We're going to work it out. So the parking inspectors here at Campbelltown are very diligent and very good at their jobs. So if you are parked out in the 2-hour parking, go out and move it. Please feel free to just get up in the middle of anybody talking and leave and go and move that. We do not want you to get fines. It's not fun. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I hope that you will be patient with me. This is my first time really speaking as any kind of history professional, and it is very terrifying. Okay. Why are you not working? I am so sorry. Thank you. Because it's coming up. I've shared that, that's fine. And then I come in here and it won't open that. We're good now. Okay. Hello. Okay. I'm just going to be referring to some notes as we talk, but yeah. Okay. Good morning and welcome, everybody. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're meeting on Darawal country today. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and future, and to all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. This always will be Aboriginal land, and sovereignty has never been ceded. Welcome to Campbelltown Library. This is our new library. As Andrew said, we've been here since August last year, and it has been a learning experience. Amazing, it's fantastic. We're always open to new chapters in history. My name's Bess, and I've lived here in Campbelltown and the surrounds for most of my life. My mob are the Waka Waka people, which is their country is up near Mergen in Queensland. And my grandfather on my mother's side was born just outside of the Cherbourg Mission, about 5 miles as the crow flies outside of Cherbourg. For the uninitiated, Cherbourg is considered to be one of the worst missions for the atrocities that were committed against the Aboriginal people there. And I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that it was considered a blessing that my grandfather was white passing enough to not have been sent there automatically. And incarcerated there. Connection to country for my family was lost, like so many other Aboriginal people. But I am proud to call myself an Aboriginal woman today and to own that heritage. I have a daughter. She has just turned 4, and she is just as white passing as I am. And she, for me, represents the future of Australia, because not only does she have a connection to the most ancient and long-lasting continual culture on the face of the planet as an Aboriginal child, but her paternal grandfather is Malaysian Chinese, and her godparents are Brazilian. And she is growing up with a connection to country here, as well as aunties and uncles from all over the world, and a Chinese name. Her cultural name is Jiai, which means love now. And in this adorable little package, we have the future of Australia and Australian culture. As far as my professional qualifications, I've been working here in the local studies team for about a year now. I started January last year. I have always been a history nerd. A lot of you will have had the same experience of, you weren't an ancient Egypt kid or a Viking kid or an ancient Greek kid. You were all of them. You wanted to know about all of them. That was me as well. And I feel incredibly privileged to work with Angela and Michael. They are the history professionals that I want to be when I grow up. And I have also been hugely privileged to work with Auntie Glenda Chalker, who is one of the aunties here in the Dharawal country. She's also an archaeologist, which is fantastic. It's a huge honour to have been able to sit down and pick her brain for this presentation. So today we're going to be discussing something that is near and dear to my heart, which is archaeology. Specifically, archaeology of Aboriginal Campbelltown. As an avid time team watcher, I've always been fascinated with what can be discerned from pulling things out of the ground. And I'm sure that a lot of you would also have heard the erroneous myth that Aboriginal people just didn't leave anything behind, and so there's no archaeology to find. So I've made it my personal mission to dismiss that misinformation. The Macarthur region on its own is positively teeming with archaeology. I'm going to give you some of the highlights today. So we're going to start off with Bull Cave. Now, Bull Cave is one of the premier Aboriginal sites in Campbelltown. To the east, out at Kentland, if you know what that is, it's out near the Georges River. So a little bit of geology to start with. The Georges River flows through sandstone country, as most rivers do in this particular part of the world. And as the river has flowed through and eroded the sandstone over time, it has carved out these overhangs in the sandstone. Those that face north, like Bull Cave, catch the sunlight, hold the warmth, and they are often quite warm, even deep into the night. The walls of these sandstone shelters are often decorated with images and hand outlines like the ones that I'm sure that you are very familiar with. But this one in particular has a depiction in charcoal of a giant hornless bull. So, in the early days of invasion, colonists lost a couple of animals. Some places it's recorded as 2 bulls and 4 cows. Other places recorded as 1 bull and 5 cows, but either way, animals were lost. So in June 1788, First Fleet Officer Watkin Trent described the loss. And he was a desperate recording, as he put it. And I quote, "An accident happened, which I record with much regret. The whole of our black cattle, consisting of 5 cows and a bull, either from not being properly secured or from negligence of those appointed to take care of them, strayed into the woods, and in spite of all the search, we have not been able to make, are not yet found." So these bulls had been polled before they came on their journey. So that is to say that they had had their horns removed. So this was to prevent them from causing injury to themselves or others in the cramped conditions of the sailing ships. So these animals were later found west of Campbelltown in what is now known as cow pasture. So it's out near Camden, if you know what that is. The bull that is depicted on the wall of Bull Cave is hornless. I don't know if you can see, there are not very many images of the bull, and this will become clear as to why later. But I hope that you can kind of see the outline in the presentation there. So since any new animals and new bulls born in Australia would not be hornless, they would have their horns naturally, we can date this depiction, this painting, to within a few very short years in terms of the historical record. The image of them on the wall appears to be the first depiction of contact between a European animal and an Indigenous Australian, which makes it incredibly important and incredibly significant to the cultural record. In 1985, the cave was first vandalised, though luckily it was able to be restored. At this time, Bull Cave was under the ordinances of the national parks, and it was managed by them. And the decision was made, and I'm quoting Auntie Glenda here, the decision was made in their wisdom to build what is now the current steel cage around the entrance to the site. In doing so, they removed soil and the containing artefacts from the site. And these are still held by the Australian Museum. There have been multiple attempts to have these returned to country, one of which was almost successful, but as of yet, these are still being held. I attempted to contact the Australian Museum to find out whether any of the artefacts have been catalogued or studied, or if we could just get an idea of what was in there, but I've been unable to make contact. Auntie Glenda was also unsure of how much had been collected and what was being held. However, she did tell me that in some of her trips to Bull Cave, she was able to see artefacts from occupation just scattered on the ground. So we can only imagine what riches must be being held in the Australian Museum at the moment. You can see here, so this is from Rachel Perkins, Bull Cave on Dharawal country. You can see that some of the graffiti is a bit pointed. And some of it is rather rude. Anyway, so after this, in the 90s, the cave was vandalised again after the cage was put up. This time, the culprits bought power tools. And the walls in the Bull Cave were irreversibly marked. The consistency of the paint that was used is such that it cannot now be removed. There are some who are investigating whether it might be able to be removed at some point, but it's not looking likely. It is a kind of modern chemical that has just bonded with the rock. The narrative that was put out in the 90s was that either the vandals of the second time were just local kids and they didn't know what they were doing and they were just mucking around, or that it was Aboriginal people themselves who were doing it. I've spoken to a couple of the local elders and they've pointed out to me that they would have needed the power tools to get in. And this is not a crime of convenience, that this required planning, forethought. Auntie Glenda pointed out that it's actually quite a trek to get up to Bull Cave. So to have to carry power tools all that way, specifically to break in and damage the archaeology there, this constitutes something much more akin to a hate crime, especially when we take into consideration the language that was used in this desecration. So for this reason, and for reasons very similar, there are several other Aboriginal sites like this one along the Georges River, and their locations have been deliberately obscured from the record. They are not written down anywhere. They are passed down by elders. And this is to protect them, actually. Okay, we're moving on now to another site out at Willowdale, which is, I know my directions, west of here. And so in what is currently known as East Leppington, around about, let's see, there, you know where Denham Court is. It's a site of great importance, really, to our understanding of Aboriginal culture and Aboriginal archaeology, I should say, and our understanding of what the Macarthur region was like before colonisation. So at this site, significant discoveries have been made. Evidence of earth ovens, which I'll go into in detail, clay ball production, anthropogenic tree modification. Now, anthropogenic, for those of you who are not time team nerds, means basically human modified, human made. Domiciliary sites, so sites where people were camping and living and playing, and many, many artifacts. I will be focusing on the earth ovens and some of the artifacts found, but this talk is quite literally the tip of the iceberg. So the excavation in 2015 focused on several sites of importance that you can see lined through here. And Aboriginal leaders and archaeologists had walked the site previously several times and noticed potential archaeological deposits, PADs. So this site has been found to contain not only evidence of domiciliary activity, but also provides us an insight into the technology that was being used by the Darawal here. So we can have a look at some of the artifacts that were found here. So these were taken from the East Leppington report that I got from GML, who are the people who did the study. And you can see that we have the these artifacts of cutting edges, which are really important. Not only that, but Auntie Glenda filled me in that the silkrete ones, which are the ones that are the pale ones, silkrete is not a rock that is found in this particular area. You've got to go further out west for that. So the fact that there is evidence of silkrete, which holds its edge and is quite a sharp rock when it's worked, being transported for use, shows trade routes, and it shows an interconnectedness of cultures and nations, which I think is often buried within the historical record. So we've also got here, this is one of the sites that they dug. So this particular site has evidence for cooking areas, the stone making workshops, and they pointed out that where no archaeological evidence remained, and where there was, I didn't have a picture of it, but there were kind of mounds that were built up, which this particular area is right near a creek. They have talked with the local Aboriginal people and done recreations. These mounds would have made perfect places to have bedding and shelters and essentially places that you need to keep stuff dry, because then the runoff would not come into your sleeping area and go around the mound and down into the creek. So this is one of those domiciliary sites. So this is the bit that fascinates me the most. This is the earth ovens. So this has been put together by a combination of archaeology and experimental archaeology, which is something near and dear to my heart. I am also, in my personal life, a medievalist. So the idea of experimental archaeology and taking what we know and trying to recreate it so that we can work out how and why, it's really, really impressive. So this got me very excited. So you can see that on figures A and B in a pit, a fire is lit gradually with an ember in a dry grass bundle kind of situation. And then on top of that, you can see in B, on top of that, balls of clay that have been manufactured nearby. Let me start that again. The balls are on the bottom of the pit. The fire is on top because the fire is on top of it. Okay. So these balls are lining the pit. Fire is on top. Some of the balls are to the side drying. And then you can see in C and D, the fire that's built up in the hardwood has been reduced down to coals, and the dried clay balls are placed over this coal. You can then see in E, the hearth is loaded again with hardwood and left until the flame dies. You can see in F, the pit is cleared and it exposes the hot base, leaving the removable and movable clay heat retaining balls in the pit. And then you can see that it says that roots are packed with wet reed, so I'm assuming that this is part of the cooking process, and placed in over the hot base. Then you've got in H, you've got more of those balls put over the top. Then the pit is sealed with the hearth is protected with sheets of stringy bark and then sealed with sand. In this way, the heat that has been built up from the clay block. There's a couple of seats down the front here, ladies, if you'd like to come down. I promise I'm not judging. So the heat that's been built up in these clay balls and is retained within them now is dispersed through whatever you're cooking in this earth oven. Which is a remarkable way of doing things. And it's something that we see repeated not only over the continent of Australia, but also through ancient cultures all through history. And the fact that we have evidence of these clay balls being manufactured quite nearby, I'll just head back to here. You can see down here in OA10 and OA11, and then over in OA7, 8, and 9 as well. Those are the sites that were found to be production of these heat retaining balls. Excuse me. So the fact that we've got evidence of production and evidence of the use of these within the same site, really important, really interesting. And this gives us evidence of this, this particular site being used for thousands of years, and being used over and over again. We do have evidence that some of the hills nearby were used for corroborees, which are gatherings, meetings of different nations, celebrations. And one of the local elders that I spoke to suggested that maybe this particular site here at East Lippington might have been used as like either as a camping ground for those celebrations, or perhaps it was something akin to a commercial kitchen, right? Because there are so many earth ovens and there's this production here. So the next bit is a little bit heavy, friends, so bear with me. So human remains and repatriation in Australia is, in any way, it's hard. It is a hard thing to deal with, and there is no fine line between or no distinct line, I should say, between what is considered archaeology and what is considered grave robbing. I am personally of the opinion that this tiptoes very close to the line of grave robbing, but we're going to get into that. So there are remains of Dharawal people being kept by various government bodies here in Australia, and local elders are campaigning for them to be returned to country. So Auntie Glenda Chalker was able to tell me about some of the remains that were being held by New South Wales Heritage. She described 2 women and 2 children who were found as almost complete skeletons near Glenfield, which I've just popped up on the screen here. So we are just south of that. Glenfield is within the Campbelltown LGA. These were found in the 1930s. And they have also been proven to have died post-colonialisation due to the fate of their teeth, essentially. So doing some quite morbid maths, these particular remains were found in the 1930s, and Campbelltown as a city didn't exist until the 1820s. The likelihood that these remains were disinterred were less than 100 years in the ground, more than likely. And they have then been removed from country with no ceremony and treated as little less than artifacts. And the fact that these skeletons and others have not been repatriated and have not been returned to country is a source of great pain to the Dharawal. And it needs to be remedied. I contacted New South Wales Heritage to see if I could find out more information, perhaps read a report. But as with the Australian Museum, my calls were left unanswered. I'm not sure whether that is because they are extremely busy, I'm sure they are, or whether they simply did not have an answer for me. Either way, we're moving on to perhaps one of the darkest points in Campbelltown's history, which is the Appin Massacre. So in 1816, Governor Lachlan Macquarie ordered one of his regiment to, quote, rid the land of the troublesome blacks, according to his own diary. This is not conjecture, this is his words. In the middle of the night, on April 17th, 14 men, women, and children were killed. Some were shot, others were trampled by horses, and some were run off cliffs. The leader of the Dharawal people at the time, Campbell, was one of these men who was killed. And this report of 14 is considered now to be a gross underestimation. Not only because of the fact that the regiment coming through and committing these atrocities gave leave to local settlers to go out and do whatever they wanted, because they could simply claim that they were acting under orders. But the disconnection from country for so many of the Dharawal people meant that their way of life, their entire understanding of the world was shifted. And we can only imagine how many hundreds must have perished afterwards. So Campbell was one of the men who was hung here in Campbelltown, brought back here, and he was hung. And not long after he was taken down from the tree that he was hung on, his head was removed. As was that of Danells, it's another Aboriginal man, and a woman who had also been killed in the massacre, but whose name is unknown. The heads were taken back to Sydney, where the colonial government bought them for 30 shillings and a gallon of rum each. The heads were removed of flesh to obtain the skulls of Campbell and the others, and these skulls were sent to Edinburgh University. Campbell's was featured in an 1820 book of the then up-and-coming science of phrenology, which we obviously now know as complete buckets. This is by Sir George Mackenzie. And Mackenzie believed that the anatomy of Campbell's skull displayed the weak reasoning powers and strong emotions of the Aboriginal Australians. And this view was typical of early phrenological study. As we know, phrenology not only is complete pseudoscience, but it is also deeply connected with eugenics and white supremacy. Campbell's skull was repatriated to Australia in 1991 from Scotland, and his skull, as well as those of Danells and the unnamed woman, are now stored in the National Museum of Australia, while efforts continue by the Dharawal people to fight for their return. Just before COVID, it looked like it might happen. And Aunt Glenda told me that they were within striking distance of having it happen. But unfortunately, everything has slowed down again, and we're unsure now when it will happen. In 2022, the New South Wales government listed the Appin Massacre site near Rocky Ponds Creek on the State Heritage Register as the quote, Appin Massacre cultural landscape protected from development. There is also, as you can see, a memorial there, and annually there is a memorial service. Here it's on the 19th of April. The Winga Mayamli Reconciliation Group hosts an annual memorial there, and they also were responsible for this beautiful plaque that marks the site. Descendants of the Aboriginal, the Appin Massacre, including Auntie Glenda, whose ancestors survived the massacre, continue to seek for the return of their skulls to country. And many elders deem the fact that they are not returned to country makes the area spiritually unsafe. And there are other remains of Darawal people that are being held by various government bodies, but there are simply too many for me to go into and to deal with today. And I would just like to thank you all for listening to me today. Whether you knew the content of what I've talked about today, whether you were aware of the rich history of the Macarthur region, I'm proud to have been asked to speak today. For far too long, history in Australia has only been considered from a colonial lens, and it has only been, you know, there were some Aboriginal people here, and then history started. And I love that this is a step towards equality, that we are now addressing that deep Indigenous history and the contributions of Indigenous Australians to Australian history. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, you had your hand up first. Hello.
Do I need a microphone? Just shout.
You can just shout, it should pick you up.
You can repeat the question, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you very much, Bess. My name's Alison from Woollahra Libraries. I wrote two quick questions. Where do the Darawal people plan to store the human remains, or do they plan to reinter them using ceremony? And does the library have a role to play in assisting with that return?
Excellent questions. So Alison from Woollahra has asked whether the Darawal, what the Darawal intend to do with the remains when they are repatriated, and whether the library has a role to play in that. I would say that they would be reinterred with ceremony, simply because the Darawal aren't wanting to keep the remains for historical preservation. They want their ancestors to be returned to the ground, especially if they are so recent. Kind of put it in the context of somebody dug up my great granny, and now I've got her back. I'm not going to keep her head on my mantelpiece. I'm going to stick her back in the ground. I'm going to have a nice ceremony about it. And I'm not entirely sure where those would be reinterred, but they would probably be reinterred somewhere secret, for reasons discussed. And as far as whether the library has a role to play in that, possibly. It would depend on what the Darawal wanted us to do, because we are here to help them on their journey. They don't owe us anything. I would hope personally to have something to do with that. I'm not a Darawal woman, but I live here, and I'm hoping to be able to contribute and to help to fight for that. Thank you. And you had a question as well.
Yes.
Hello.
My name's Ryan. I'm from Ride Library. Library.
Yeah,
Library,
we love that.
I was curious to know about the archaeological sites at East Leppington,
Mhm.
Denham Court. Seeing now, because I'm a map person, that they've been paved over with houses and everything like that. Were they preserved in some way? Do you know, or
So
out of general curiosity? That's
no, definitely. So I'm sorry, I got stuck on Ride Library and Live Library, and I forgot your
Don't
name.
worry, I do too. Ryan.
Ryan from Ride Library asked about the archaeological sites at East Leppington and whether they've been preserved because they are now housing estate. I believe that all of the artifacts were removed and have been preserved. And the area was considered to be reasonably clear of archaeological remains. And the report that I was referencing through that, 700 odd pages. They got everything. They got everything that they could possibly get out of it. And now it is housing. I think that there is a plan to include reference to some of those sites and some of that that history through like street signs and like parks and stuff, but that technically falls in Camden Library or Camden Council, whether they do that.
Oh, thank you.
Cool. Were there any other questions? Yeah.
Just a question from Monica in the chat.
Oh, I was going to do that one.
Okay,
So great.
cool.
Okay, both of you. Hello.
So she's asked, how does the library make the history available and accessible to the community?
Yeah. So the library makes the history accessible and available to the community, obviously through our digital records. We also obviously get quite a lot of inquiries. We are always happy to answer questions. We present on things. We put displays together. As far as the Darawal heritage is concerned and the Darawal history there, we make public whatever they want us to make public. So as I said, there is quite a lot that is considered to be sacred. It's Darawal business, it's blackfella business, it's not for whitefella. And that kind of information we would not be putting out publicly. We do have plans to make things more accessible and more available to the general public, hoping to publish more papers, more articles, hoping to give more talks like this one. It is a work in progress. Amazing. Were there any other questions? Yes.
Building on that one, Ellen, State Library of New South Wales, I was wondering, you sound like you've got a really constructive relationship with the local Aboriginal elders. For people who haven't started connecting with local Aboriginal elders, what would be some suggestions you would make to help them?
Yeah, okay. So Ellen at the State Library has asked about building relationships with the local Aboriginal elders. I can say that it has taken a long time. Even as an Aboriginal woman, even as somebody who is highly educated in this subject, it has taken me a long time to build these relationships. I would suggest for those of you in public libraries to start with your Aboriginal Reconciliation Officer or Liaison Officer at Council, because they will have connection to the locals. There are a whole lot of courses and talks and information out there about communication with Aboriginal people, especially with Aboriginal elders, because some of the etiquette is different to that than you would have with a white resident or residents that aren't Aboriginal. I would definitely recommend reaching out from a perspective of what can we do for you? What can we help you with? These are some options, but what do you need? Because we don't want to be going to them only when we need something. We don't want to be going and talking to the aunties only when we need information about a presentation. We want to have that relationship already and then say, hey, can we have a yarn about this? I've got this, I need to pick your brain. I think that that's probably the best bet. And I mean, finally, it is respecting when they don't want to talk to you. Because as I'm sure everybody here is aware, the distrust between government and Aboriginal people is palpable and quite well earned. And if they don't want to have a relationship, you've just got to respect that. You've just got to leave it. Were there any other questions?
I'd just like to point out, we also have an Aboriginal reference group at Campbelltown, which we join their meetings quite regularly.
Yes.
I'm Andrew from Campbelltown Library, by the way. So that's another way that we can, exchange ideas and thoughts.
Yeah. So if you have anything like that, again, get in touch with your Aboriginal liaison officer at council because they will know all of that stuff. Don't rock up uninvited. Only get an invitation. But yes, if you've got like a reference group or a any kind of group like that, that's your best bet. Are there any other questions? Yes, hello.
I'm Kasia from Burwood Library.
Yeah.
And I'd like to ask a question. Should there be an archaeological dig and a body is found? And obviously this body is dating back to the Aboriginal time. What is the protocol to treat this body in the most respectful way? Like learning about this body and about the culture that this body represents, but not disturbing this body and not making any assumptions in the name of science.
Yeah. So Kasia from Burwood just asked about what's the protocol and what do you do when you're doing an archaeological dig and you find remains. And just so that I understand you correctly, when you say dating back to Aboriginal times, do you mean like pre-colonialisation or?
So it is a body obviously of Aboriginal remains.
Okay, yeah.
And in every archaeological dig, when you find something, there are investigations and obviously things that one wants to learn out of the dig, out of the respect and looking at the Aboriginal culture. What would be the protocol of investigating this body?
Yeah. So I think that whole concept of of having I think that this is a really good argument for always having Aboriginal representation when you're doing an archaeological dig on Australian soil. Because wherever you go, you're digging into Aboriginal land, right? As I said at the beginning of this talk, sovereignty has not been ceded. We are on occupied country. So if you don't have Aboriginal representation on your dig, I would make the assumption that you would then need to call in the locals. You would need to contact whoever is in charge of that at your local land council or in your local elder community, and contact them and ask them what to do. Because we have to remember that Aboriginality is not a monolith, right? I specifically referencing the Dharawal here, which is one nation. There are over 300 language groups. So just as Italy will have different burial rites and understanding of treatment of human remains to Ireland, each nation is going to have a different way of dealing with their dead, and I would be relying on what the locals want you to do. Most of the time, I'm going to hazard a guess that is going to be, you're okay, we can learn what we can, but then it goes back in the ground where you found it. I'm just going to assume that, because that is also what happens a lot in other archaeological digs. Is, you know, we learn as much as we can from the skeleton, and then the skeletons are repatriated. Because we cannot lose sight of the fact that these are human remains. These are people. And these are people whose connection to their culture and their country is so deeply important to them. And we should not be just taking them willy-nilly. We are getting towards the end of my presentation. Were there any other questions that I could answer? If not, that's fine. My details are up on screen here. Please feel free to send me an email to have a chat. I'm more than happy to chew your ear off about this, as I have done today. But thank you so much, guys. You've been amazing.
Thank you very much. Just before we go to the next speaker, can everyone tick off their name? So the next speaker, Adam, are you there?
Yep.
Oh,
Hello.
Okay, so Adam will be talking about his newsletter, local studies newsletter.
Hey guys, can everyone see me and hear me? Good,
Yes.
awesome.
Yes.
I will share my screen so you get the slides. There we go. Has that come through? Slideshow up?
Yep, that's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, let's get started. That was incredible as well. That was incredibly interesting and important, powerful. So thank you, Bess, for that. And I shall start mine. So I'm talking today about the Local Studies Journal that we've created at Morley Library. It was an initiative that we first thought up in December of 2024. So for those of you who don't know, Morley is a New South Wales regional shire. We're about 8.5 hours northwest of Sydney. So our shire consists of 12,000 people with the town centre of around 7,000, but our shire distance covers about 200 kilometres by 200 kilometres. So it's very different to what we might see in the city. And as you can see on the slide, this is the archive what it looked like when I first arrived in my role just over 2 years ago now. So for those of you who have involvement in your local studies archive, you'll probably see a few things there that have potential, and a few things there that when you first walk in straight away, you're like, okay, this might need to be modified. One of the first things was that there were several items quite large that were not local studies related. This included old tables, old chairs, photographs that were just part of council's collection that they didn't know where to put it, as many of you could probably relate to as well. It was relatively messy and disorganized. We also had a lot of local studies material divided between several locations in town, such as the town library, the council, the Aboriginal Resource Centre, which was also the building of the old library. So some material hadn't yet been transferred over. The various art galleries in town also held things. We've got 2 museums in town, the Historical Society. So there was quite a large dispersed collection in the town with no catalogue of where it all is and what's available. Most knowledge of the archive also left with the previous person. There were a few handover notes or established structure. So we were kind of working from a bit of a disadvantage to start with. Most of the archive, when we began, was material collected or created by the Historical Society, local history books, birth, death, marriage, cemetery, baptism records, or your standard public information. So As you can somewhat see in this image, the local history research room was at the top of the library in the corner, or still is, and behind a locked door. A lot of people in town didn't even know that the library existed, let alone the local history archive. And there was little marketing of what was held and how people could access it. And there's actually a quote that I found in an article by Ellen, actually. It was a quote of Grant White, and I'll just read it now. It says that survival of the artifact is only ever significant when it can be accessed by someone who can see meaning in it. The collection is in fact much more than the material sitting upon the shelves. It is access to it. Access which keeps it current in the community memory rather than as a separated, isolated adjunct. And I think that's the core purpose behind everything we've done in the past 2 years, is that there's all this material of the town's history, the town's heritage, the region's history, but there was just no access for accessibility for the community to engage with it. And as such, it was less of an archive and more of a collection of things in an attic collecting dust, unfortunately. So the first steps that I've begun were relationship building with community. These included family history workshops, a couple of guest speaker roles, slowly developing the digital photo collection, a fairly extensive reorganising of the local studies room. This included weeding materials that weren't relevant to the local shire, ordering in new boxes, new folders, appropriate plastic sleeves, contacting agencies who had put tables, chairs, paintings in the room that needed to be moved somewhere else that was more relevant, and just a general reorganisation and clean. That was 100% the very first things that was needed. The next steps was essentially furthering what we were doing initially, establishing relationships with the local galleries, historical society, various universities. The closest to us is the University of New England, various local clubs like the Lions and the RSL, the Aboriginal Resource Centre. We also wanted to develop a bit of a social media platform as well to reach more people, as in a small town, you don't always have huge numbers entering into the library each day. So we began a council social media historical photo of the month on the council Facebook page, and we've now received a number of times over 250, 300 reacts on those photos, which is fantastic. It also, another part of what we were doing was also sourcing new photos. These ranged from local donations, old newspaper clippings that are now out of copyright, as well as images stored by the state and national libraries and various other museums related to the town. So that by now, when I started, the digital collection sat at around 200 photos, and now we've just hit 2,000. The majority of which are from before 1955 and out of copyright, which is fantastic for our town to have. So the birth of the journal, which is the crux of this talk, was an idea I had in November 2024. And it was a way to keep moving in the direction of what I've been saying, of community access, community engagement, and getting these stories out so that they're not just sitting behind closed doors or in the memories of a couple of keen older historians in town, but instead to get it out and discussed in community. So the first edition, which this is a photo of, came in January 2025, and we've been doing it quarterly since. And for a little bit of background as well, I have a relative university background, and part of my passion and strengths are writing. So it was obviously easier for me to do this than it might be for someone who doesn't have that comfort. But it's still something I would encourage people to at least explore the possibility of. One of the first things we had to do, obviously, was marketing. So this included social media on the council's Facebook page, having permission to put it up on the Historical Society's Facebook page, various local Facebook pages, posters at the library, and word of mouth, which in a small regional town is probably the most important, especially when you're dealing with history, which, as much as we wish to reach a broad demographic, most of the people engaging this material are of an older demographic, many of which do not use social media in this town. So it's really important that we go out and we talk to these people. One, give them a flyer in person, and two, have them know the person running the event, because half the time they'll come just to support you, and then they'll begin being interested in the material afterwards. We also had to deal with how we wanted access to the journal to be organised. So we had PDF options, we had print copies, and we, fortunately, council approved us to also have mail copies. So for people with accessibility issues or full-time carers, we could mail a copy to their residence or their PO box free of charge. The only cost was printing, and fortunately we've been able to cover that either through library funding, or this year we've had a grant to do that as well. So the format of the journal it's ranged from around 52 to 64 pages. These are A5 pages, so it comes to around 13 to 16 double-sided A4 pieces of colour paper, which, although you can squeeze a fair bit of content into that, does make printing a little bit cheaper when you're dealing only with 13 double-sided pages. Obviously, it's still costly when you do it professionally, but it is a lot easier when you're doing A5. Each edition comes to approximately 7,000 words, and the contents line up similarly to what we see here. So for the most part, there's 3 core sections. We'll do a focus item, which highlights an item in our archive, which was one of the main things I was really passionate about including. So various old photo albums, old plaques, old artifacts we could take photos of, we could put in the journal, and we could introduce them to people in the town. We could then also bring these items out onto display after we've released the journal so that people can engage with it physically as well. We also then have an oral history interview with a local person who has something that we determined to be important to say. And this has probably been the most popular aspect of it so far. People love being able to read the stories of someone they know. It's also really important being in a quite isolated regional community that quite often you don't get the same opportunities to have these stories recorded, especially if they live in a village of, say, 50 people, an hour from the nearest town. So it's been really, really important for us not only to get those stories recorded and written down, but actually broadcasted to the broader community. And then a research article that I'll write on various different topics. So as anyone can imagine, there were various logistical challenges that came up. Printing costs were one. Encouraging people to be interested in history at all, and what we call a journal, which is quite a dry academic term, which I'm well aware. So that's always been an issue from the start, of just encouraging people to engage in it. Accessing people who don't use social media. Another challenge we had was that initially the proposal to me was that for someone to access a PDF copy, they would have to email me directly, and I could send them that PDF copy to encourage engagement with the library. But I was well aware from the start that if we just put the copy up online on the council website, we could massively boost engagement. It's so much easier for someone just to click on a link than it is to email someone or call someone and get it sent to them. So fortunately now we've been able to establish that. The various questions around oral history was also a challenge, whether that's to do with contracts, community trust. Sometimes there's local politics of someone being upset that one person was asked and not a different person. This also came into question in terms of research articles. Community politics is always something you need to navigate with these things. There was another element as well of writing history as an outsider. So I'm not actually from the town, I'm from Newcastle. And despite living here now just over 2 years and doing this work, it's still really important for me each time to recognise that I am that. So stepping in, especially if I'm writing an article and not interviewing someone, making sure that I consult people who are relevant to it, ensuring that the information is accurate. And fortunately, the town's been really receptive and happy for me to bring some of the stories to light. So 15 months now after we started the journal, our present and just over 2 years after I started in the role, we've definitely expanded the local studies area, which is fantastic. Our photo collection is now about 2,200 digital and about 1,500 physical, approximately 250 local history books, 16 oral histories. From essentially zero digital archive, we now have 5.5 gigabytes of various material from photos, videos, interviews, PDF copies, etc. And the readership of the journal has now hit 400 people each edition, which is, like I said, fantastic considering we're in a town of 7,000. An important aspect of that group as well is people who have now moved out of town, but whose childhoods or part of their adult life were in the town and can now engage from afar. Next steps is honestly just trying to boost it even further. Hopefully we can grow to potentially, like, the end goal would be 1,000. Obviously that's a really, really bold goal for a small town, but there is a really large diaspora, and it is a town really fascinated in its own history. But then you also have the questions of just a more complete local studies department, so more detailed metadata, more accurate cataloguing, several items occasionally needing rehoming. We also want to expand our advertising as well. So far, we have been using the local newspaper and ABC radio as well for advertising. I was interviewed on Country ABC a couple of months ago, but hopefully if we can continue doing that, we can reach the broader region and not just Moree as well. And we've also been encouraged to upload the journals to the National e-deposit, which would be a really valuable initiative as well. And just to tie it up, because I know it's only a short window that we get to speak for, but the purpose of the journal comes back to what we were saying of it's all about access, especially in smaller towns who may not have the resources or the size to have really large archives or a section of the library completely dedicated to history. I know some lucky libraries may even have an entire floor dedicated to a museum, and that's incredible. It's really important that the smaller regions as well also bring these material out from behind a locked door and just bring it into communities so that it can be engaged with, it can be discussed, at times it can be debated, and that's what really gives life to all of our local studies collections, that there's some sort of community involvement, whether that's in its collection policy itself or quite simply just in the discussions that it causes. It's really vital, and we've found ourselves that if you create something that people can engage with and advertise it. Ultimately, they do. So our very first edition had about 100 readers, and already we've gone to 400 in just over a year. So yeah, there's only bigger goals for the future, and I encourage anyone who has the I guess capacity or the time to create some form of a journal or a newsletter or some element of a publication, that the community, at least ours, is really receptive to it. And then these are my contact details as well. So if any library is thinking about doing something like this, or even just more interested in our collection as a whole or how we've gone about it, please don't hesitate to call or ask. I'm always available. And yeah, thank you. If anyone, I know it's about to be morning tea, but if anyone has a quick question, I'm willing to answer.
Any questions? Yes.
It's Michelle from Hawkesbury. Adam, is the newsletter available online?
Yes, it is. I can put in the link into the chat if everyone would like. If you'd like to access it, it will be in the chat at the Teams meeting.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hello, Adam. My name's Athena. I'm from Fairfield City Open Libraries. With your journal, I was just curious because you mentioned about like capacity, like it sounds amazing. I was just curious about how you organize to make the journal. Like how long does it take you to make? Do you make one in advance? Just curious about that.
Yeah. So it's a one-person department in Moree. So there is the element of having something relatively large done every 3 months can be a challenge. But you're right, as long as we plan, or I plan relatively far in advance, it's usually been manageable enough. I've been lucky that I can go to people for help when it comes to more logistical matters, like organising printing, organising funding. I'm lucky that my library manager is happy to help organise some of that and leave the more journal-esque elements to me, which is great. But yeah, it does take a while. Usually, I can if I dedicate an entire day to it, I can usually write an article or two. But the longest part of the preparation is the interviews. You've got to decide who to interview. You've got to reach out to them, organise a time that works best for them. Usually it's best to meet them if you've never met them before on a separate occasion. Meet them, get to know them, talk to them about the project, and then come back again another day, do the interview. Then you've got to transcribe it. Then you've got to cut it down for publication. So that's the most timely process. But it's worth it because it's the part that community most enjoys.
Thank you.
Another question?
Hi, I'm Jo from Wollongong. Just interested in your title of journal, which is quite an academic sort of word. Was there reasons for that? Did you consider calling it something else, like a magazine or whatever?
Yeah, I did. It was quite a lengthy process of deciding what to call it. Newsletter, booklet, magazine were all mentioned. But I ultimately decided journal because the local historical society ran a journal for a very long time, 40 to 50 years, which unfortunately isn't written. Well, it still is occasionally written, but not to the regularity that it used to be. And I believe that by calling it a journal, it's more likely to be considered, I guess, a historical book or historical document that will go into the archive and be engaged with. I didn't want to give people the wrong impression of saying magazine or newsletter and then going in and expecting maybe a crossword or find a word, which was suggested at one stage that maybe we could introduce that in. So it was a hard decision, but ultimately we went with journal because we thought it matched the content that we put in the best.
Is there another question? Yes, one more question. Yes.
Hi, Adam, it's Alison from Wallara again. Congratulations and fantastic, inspiring work. I hope that you're putting your journal through the national e-deposit system. Great, so we can all be able to access it on Trove as well.
Not yet. Ellen has contacted me and suggested we do it. It is on my to-do list. So next time any of you may hear from me, you should expect it by then. And if it's not, you can hold me to account.
Any other questions? That was great. Thank you, Adam.
That's all right. Anytime.
Okay, morning tea time.
Okay, I'm Tara from Liverpool City Library. I'm going to introduce our next guest speaker today, who is Dr. Stephen Gapps. Dr. Stephen Gapps is a historian and author working to bring the frontier war histories into broader recognition as Australia's first wars. His latest book is Uprising, War in the Colony of New South Wales, 1838 to 1844. Which reveals the incredible story of this extensive frontier resistance warfare for the first time. Today, Stephen is going to discuss the importance of local studies collections in his work, the significance of local First Nations stories, and the strengths and weaknesses of local studies collections in terms of the Australian frontier wars. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me to talk. I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we're on, but also to acknowledge a lot of the First Nations groups that I've worked with in my books that I'll be talking about today. Some years ago, Henry Reynolds, you probably know Henry Reynolds, you must know Henry Reynolds, Frontier Wars historian, said, "The big picture of Australia's frontier wars has been covered by historians, and what we need now are local focused accounts." And that's what actually, he said that, I think it was 97 or so. That inspired me to write about my local area. It led me into talking about Sydney, and in particular about Western Sydney, where I'm from, Blacktown boy. In this talk today, I'll cover my work in undertaking some of these more focused histories, including the Sydney Wars, the Bathurst War, and my most recent work, as Tara mentioned, Uprising, which actually looks across the frontier in the 1830s from Melbourne-ish in Victoria right up to Brisbane. I want to focus on the importance of local studies collections in all this work, as well as the significance of First Nations stories and the strengths and weaknesses of local studies collections in terms of the Australian frontier wars. And more strengths than weaknesses, I find. But first, I said the Australian frontier wars. You probably know it as the Frontier Wars. You may have seen the recent SBS Rachel Perkins documentary, The Australian Wars, and the book of the series came out last year. And I was one of the editors with Rachel and Henry Reynolds and Min Murray. It's a great book. In fact, like my publisher tells me if I sell 2,000, I've done a good job. If I sell 5,000 copies total of a book, that's pretty good for history. We sold 10,000 copies in 2 months of a hardback. Right now it's in paperback already from December to now. So I'm really pleased about that. I think it's a sign of changing times. And I also think it's hopefully leading us to think about, to get rid of that term frontier wars. I've never liked it. Aboriginal people I've spoken to have always said, yeah, what's that mean? It's like, you know, there's other names. Did anyone ask First Nations people about what we call these wars? No, back in the 70s, Henry Reynolds invented the term, it seemed good, and it's been with us. But it's always about it's about the frontier of the edge of the empire. And, like Uncle Bill Allen I spoke to in Bathurst, he said, well, why isn't it a war for the defence of homelands? Like, look from the other side. So I and Rachel come up with the idea of calling it just simply the Australian Wars. And I think that is hopefully what it will be called in future. And I try and call it that. And then people go, what's that? What Australian Wars? So often I have to say the Australian Frontier Wars. I think that'll lead to a shift eventually, I hope. Unfortunately, I still find people who don't know what the Frontier Wars were either. So just quickly an overview of my work, if you don't know. Really, my Frontier Wars interest, I said it. My interest in the Australian Wars began looking at Sydney and in the Sydney Wars book, Conflict in the Colony, 1788 to 1816, 17. And it came out in 2018. And I'd been thinking about that book ever since Henry Reynolds mentioned it. And I just kept thinking, why? Why hasn't this been written? Why hasn't anyone? How many books are on colonial Sydney? Thousands. How many pages? Hundreds of thousands. But no one had and people have talked about the conflict in Sydney in those books, but no one had focused it as a resistance war or series of resistance wars and used as kind of military history lens and just looked at that angle, the conflict in Sydney, rather than the conflict in the context. And to my surprise, it did all right. Very much to my surprise, because I was actually a little bit concerned about the history wars, about being attacked, but I haven't been until recently. But it was what I wanted to do with the Sydney Wars was just pull together all these facts that were floating around Sydney and Western Sydney, from the Hawkesbury to Appin, and pull them together into a narrative that is undeniable, just based on facts, right? And so I couldn't really be attacked. With the Sydney Wars, when that came out and got really good reception, it won the inaugural prize for the writing of military history, awarded by the Australian War Memorial. And I was like, whoa, wow. That led me to the Bathurst Wars, because I found this interesting connection at the end of the Sydney Wars. Macquarie's campaign, which goes through the southwest and around the Nepean, he then sends a last-minute detachment west to guard the Bathurst Road, thinking that, Bathurst is the prime jewel of the colony at this point by 1824, by 1816. So Macquarie guards Bathurst. That led me to Bathurst. And the Bathurst War, people knew about the Bathurst War, but when I looked into it, there'd been 2 books written about it. One by local historians, which was minimal, it was only short, but it was, good. And another by Mary Coe, who wrote, and was kind of based on that, but it was very short as well. No one had done a studied, detailed account of that war. The first Wiradjuri War of Resistance, that was. And that involved a lot of talking to elders, a lot of visits to different groups all around the Central West. The Sydney Wars was not so much engagement with communities, because I was really concerned about showing that history through the colonial archive itself. The Bathurst War is different. There's communities there, there's First Nations knowledge holders in the Central West, and it was really important to talk to all of them. It was also really important to talk to local studies and to local history societies and museums. And that was where I found one really key document that begins the whole book, which is a recollection, or one of those 1880s reminiscences of an early colonist, where he basically says, he admits that there was massacres. He says we were sent out mounted and armed in about 20 of us, and we were told to shoot anyone and everyone, big, little, young and old, men and women. So there's this, recollection. Of course, he doesn't say where, when, how many people died, etc., making it still so murky. And that's part of the problem of the history wars, where people say, yeah, there's no real evidence, where's the numbers? Where did it happen? It's common right across New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, you name it. Now the Bathurst War, that led me to think about, well, that was the first Wiradjuri War of Resistance. Hang on, that means there was another one. So I went looking into that. And of course, there has been no study apart from a local history by Bill Gamage. I don't know if you know Bill Gamage, the greatest state on earth, historian who became an academic historian, but he did a local history of Narrandera Shire back in 1980. That was the most detailed look at the second Wiradjuri War, the Southern War. So of course, Uprising came out of that, looking at that war as part of a conflict that burst in the late 1830s as the frontier expanded, as the squatters took their stock, their sheep, their cattle, north into the New England area, a little bit west, but not so much at this point, and then south down following Major Mitchell's track, Murrumbidgee and then the Murray, and joining Sydney to Melbourne on Mitchell's Road. Interesting thing about the second war was that the Sydney to Melbourne Road, which was fantastic. The colony was, wonderful. We don't have to take boats all the way to Melbourne, and squatters can drive their sheep and cattle down. Was cut off for a short period by resistance from warriors in around Benalla, actually. And the interesting thing about that is, I had to look at Benalla local history and talk to the Benalla local Aboriginal history group, which has been formed recently in Benalla, and revise this account of this conflict that occurred there, so-called Faithful Brothers Massacre. I won't go into the detail of that. It's really, really interesting in terms of how that local story of the massacre of white men is entrenched in Benalla and is slowly being overturned to show that it was actually a battle. These stockmen were armed and they lost in a battle against warriors. It wasn't but it's been called a massacre. So that's, and in Benalla, street names, hopefully there's someone from Benalla on the here, but the local groups are now saying, well, maybe we should change the street names to honour these people who fought the people invading their lands. Now, and as I've mentioned, after Uprising, I worked on the Australian Wars. So I've mentioned a little bit about how I used local studies collections, and I'll just give another example. In research for the Bathurst War, I looked at Millthorpe. Does anyone know Millthorpe? It's a beautiful little town, right? And the story of the founding of Millthorpe is based upon this early landholder, early land grantee, William Booth, and he's regarded as the founder of Millthorpe because he had the first land grant there. Now, he was also in 1824 a convict stock worker who shot Aboriginal people on site for killing sheep. Now, he was not punished for that. He was actually given a land grant that is the base of Millthorpe today. So it's that story of Booth, I wouldn't have found unless I talked to local study librarians and looked at local archives. So have I found local studies collections to be useful? Yes, of course I have. Very useful. And I've I guess I've emphasised a few ways that there's stories that aren't in the the general picture, the national picture of these Australian wars histories. There's sources that are not digitized sometimes. And you have to ask, and there's librarians who say, have you looked at this? And pull out a folder or a box and whatever, it's been really useful, and it's generally my first port of call in a research project is to go to a local studies collection, go to the local history society, go to the local museum sometimes they're together. So they've been really, really useful to me. Now, the use of First Nations oral histories and knowledge, how do I go about that? It can be really difficult. With the Bathurst War, I would talk to one group of people and they'd say, don't go and talk to those people. And I'd go and talk to those people. And they'd say, don't go and talk to them. So I'd go and talk to them. In some ways, as a white historian, it's kind of easier for me to go and talk to different groups who may have differences. That's one element of the difficulty. Another is just contacting people and being able to talk to them, and that takes time and trust. And I think it really took me at least 3 years, 4 years of going back and forth to elders in Bathurst to gain enough respect to be told stories. So it takes time and effort. Do you guys have the time and effort and resources and to do that? Probably not. Do I? No, I spend a lot of my own money doing it. But some of these projects I've been able to get research grants for and advances, and that's enabled that kind of research. Using that knowledge is also tricky. Sometimes I recall talking to some people who have got lots of stories. Some people haven't. I remember talking to a descendant of an Aboriginal girl who was 3 years old in the 1820s, who was the sole survivor of a massacre of all her family members. There's a lot of loss in that, that family connection. And part of this, I hope, part of what I do is about a bit of recovery in all that. But yeah, how do I use them? You carefully. You've got to go through all the protocols, and I'm sure protocols about permissions and access. But I find the most important thing is using, maybe quoting someone in a part of a story, and showing them and giving them a copy and talking them through it. And that's where you get, this is a proof, rather than just say, thanks for you, write it down, and I'll email you a copy or whatever. And I found too, going back and presenting a book to someone who's in that book is really, really important too. So lots of different elements to that. That's kind of how I go about it. Not all First Nations history is in oral history, though. A lot of it is as I've been saying, is in our archives. So early colonial diaries, reminiscences, as I said, they're often in local studies collections. And perhaps, there's a lot of information that in these reminiscences, diaries, whatever, that can assist First Nations in maybe in recovering some of those histories. And I think that's a really important part of what local studies collections and people can do. Some of the other strengths I've mentioned, librarians are helpful and knowledgeable and point to sources. And also there's images in collections that are really important. I don't put images in my book, but I usually use just maps for various reasons, partly because I don't want to recycle old colonial images of the images of old Parramatta or whatever that we've seen a million times. And I also use First Nations artists on the covers of my books. I think that imagery of the past coming from someone who has a continuous association with that past is much more accessible, much more interesting, much more important than recycling old colonial imagery. Having said that, your collections do have, you know, in other areas, perhaps not in Frontier Wars histories, but you know, useful photographs and things. But you've got to be, in terms of First Nations, you've got to be very careful with how those are used, obviously. And I'm sure you've all come across this and these issues. Now, the gaps in local collections and what librarians might be including in local studies collections. I think oral histories are one, and I've kind of touched on the difficulties. I understand the difficulties of collecting those oral histories, but I strongly suggest don't give up. Don't give up. Gain trust of people. Show them what can happen. How it can be, how it can change, you know, other people's thinking, seeing these stories. You know, and I understand there's a fear of treading on toes, and there's a fear of just a fear of contacting, you know, outside your usual networks. But I really strongly urge, you know, that try it, just try. At the moment, you may well know, the New South Wales schools curriculum is changing. So teachers in year 7, 8, 9 and 10 in various ways. The curriculum for 9 and 10 is including a mandatory subject in history, Aboriginal First Nations experience of colonialism, something like that. And an element of that is the Australian Frontier Wars. Now, teachers for the last 12 months have been contacting me and others and going, this is really hard to teach. How do we teach this? You know, and I can see it's a similar situation with collections and libraries. But you know, so they have been working through that. And with the Australian Wars book, there is a huge series of online education material that teachers are finding really helpful, and you might find that as well. And also it includes ways to teach these. You know, if you're teaching year 7 about massacres, it's kind of difficult. You know, you've got to be careful, but there's ways to do it. Now, local Aboriginal histories, not as part of a general local history, but standalone. So we've all got a history of Campbelltown, Liverpool, wherever. And that may, you know, older ones probably had the first couple of pages about First Nations history and that's it. And then it goes on. Newer ones show First Nations continuous presence right throughout to the present. But I encourage people to think about it. Well, if you haven't got a local First Nations history, can you facilitate one? Can you get a grant? Can you get council to assist? Can you assist council? Just some ideas that I'm chucking out there about that. But I think having I did a thematic history, First Nations thematic history for Liverpool, which is a draft, as we discussed, is up online. And that's a First Nations history from the past to the present for the Liverpool area. And I think that's really important for all local areas. Aboriginal family history material. A lot of, especially in country areas, regional areas, there's this big search for family history records. For people who know that they're Aboriginal, missing some pieces here and there, for people who are trying to find out their ancestry. And I think local studies can and should help in that. And there's different groups and organisations that you can work with in that process. Now, I want to finish up and have time for a few questions, I hope. with a couple of websites. Where's it gone?
You highlight that one, yeah.
There's another one.
If you
There's
highlight
another-
this one, you'll get the tab of both.
Yeah, but there's another one that I pulled up. It's gone.
Okay, but maybe,
I'll go to this one first then.
and then share, yeah.
I wanted to.
And the other one you can get through via the tab, because you can actually see the tab.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. I wanted to show two things, two maps. I did want to show the colonial frontier massacre map, which I hope people are familiar with. That was developed by the University of Newcastle a few years ago, and plotted out over 400 massacre events around the country. If you're not familiar with it, this is why I'm showing these two websites. Please do have a look. The massacre map gained a lot of attention. I think a little bit. I find a few problems with that massacre map and the attention it gained, largely because it kind of leads to a focus on the Australian wars were all a series of massacres, rather than allowing for that there actually was resistance. It wasn't just a walkover. This project that I'm working with is just underway, and this is really a draft template of mapping Australian wars and resistance. Now, already, and we've only been doing this for a little while, we have identified 40 different wars across Australia. Now, we're working through what a definition of war is. We want to be really clear about that. We want First Nations people to say, yeah, that was a war, or that was more some conflict. You shouldn't call it a war. But these ones so far, we're pretty clear these are regarded as wars. And if you zoom in, these are just rough. They're very roughly placed at the moment. So ignore, it should be this one. Yes. So kind of like, if you know the massacre map, it's a similar format, and you click on a war and there's all sorts of information, a narrative, basic narrative of the war. This is one I contributed. Sources, and then timeline map. Yeah. With locations. So if you zoom in, you can see where things happen. And this is, I guess why I'm showing you this too is that these need to be developed with local people on local sites. And that's hopefully what will happen perhaps over the next 3 years of this project. I think that's probably how long it might take. So you've got a cluster of events there. If we zoom in, one of the massacres on the massacre map, they're often plotted just, near in that area. Because sometimes you don't want to show where it was, sometimes we don't know exactly where it was. The massacre map did plot a massacre on the mayor of Bathurst's property, and he was most concerned. It was like, oh no, it's just accidental. It was just meant to be in that area somewhere. And then when you get down to the events, you get a description, place name, and sources. So if you can imagine doing that for the whole country, from Torres Strait to Tasmania, and all the events that have historical records are put into that map. I think it's a really important and will be a really useful project, but it's a big project as well. And we're kind of looking for funding at the moment. So if anyone's got several $1 million to spend, that would be great.
Yeah.
Now it's just past 12, so I think I'll finish up there. Hopefully that's given you something to think about in terms of the Australian wars. And hopefully you might have some questions. Or not, you don't have to. I thought you were going to. Yes.
Hi, Stuart, it's Michelle from Hawkesbury. What was your best find in a local studies collection over the past few years?
Yeah, I reckon it was the recollection of Tom Miller that talked about the massacres in Bathurst. Yeah, that has to stand up as one of the best ones. And that was just actually what was it before photocopying? What were they called? Gestetners? Yeah. It was just a Gestetner copied in a box, you know, of an original, you know, handwritten manuscript. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Jo from Wollongong. Just wondering, any suggestions for family history for Aboriginal people? Are there any organisations or websites you would recommend for that?
Yeah. There's the well, there's native title called NTS Corp, Native Title Services. Do research. They have an historian. What are they called? Find something or other. I can't remember the name of the group. Is really good at looking at institutions and where people were, and they have a history of the institution, what, you know, First Nations people went through it, all that sort of stuff. It's really, really good. There's a few others that are useful. I can't think of right now, but you know, it's worth reaching out.
Yeah.
And it might be a case where I've seen libraries host family history events and host a First Nations family history event.
Yeah.
Bring the local studies collection people into it. You know, that's I've seen those and they've been really good. Yeah, really valuable to a lot of people.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions from people online.
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, I think to the family history question, then Adam mentioned link up and IATSIS.
Yeah.
But the questions firstly from Karen, does the mapping include dates of the wars?
Yes. Yeah, it'll definitely includes as much information as we can in each one. Yeah.
And Mel asks, I guess asking if people can get in contact with you, you know, for questions down the track.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Contact Tara to get my email, or you know, a good researcher, or a bad researcher can hunt me down on the internet. It's not hard these days, unfortunately.
And Kimberly's just said that the website was Find and Connect.
Find and Connect. That's it. Yeah. Thank you.
I have one more question about the map.
Mm.
You say like it's an ongoing project. How are you getting contributions of information to that map?
So far, it's just been the organising group.
Yeah.
That's we want to get it set up as a template, so that we can then show people this is what the project looks like, and then you need to give us some money, and this is how it will roll out, and then it will be a case of going to each local area, and you know, working with people on the ground.
So there may be a way in the future that, yeah, like some of these collections could contribute to the information.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, if that's all the questions, so your library should have a copy of this, please, before they're off the shelves. And you know, you can get my other books too for your library, so I can't see it here. But okay, well, thank you very much. And just to finally say thank you for the work that you guys do. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we've got our flash talks. So first up is Helen. Is it Helen? Yeah. You there, Helen?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay.
Let's just start the video. Doesn't want to display. Oh, there we go.
Yep, we can see you.
Great.
Great, we've got it.
Excellent. Okay, so I just would also like to pay my respects and acknowledge the Darawal people on whose land I'm coming from today as well. The project I wanted to talk about today was the Notice of Transfer collection, which is a really great house history resource which we're working on at the moment. It's always great to have good resources, and we do have quite a few history resources for searching houses. We have a good run of rate books, maps and electoral rolls, but of course it's always good to have another source. This came to us from a retiring member of staff many years ago who was looking for a safe haven for a collection of files called the Notice of Transfers, and so we took custody of them. But we had no permission and no direction really as to how we could actually make them available. So just recently we've been given permission to actually use them. So it's now a work in progress. So what are the Notice of Transfers? Transfers were mandatory and used to update council rate books when land changed ownership. And originally they were in paper forms and they were used to record the transfers, which were then kept in chronological order. The transfer number was noted in the rate book and provided a chain of ownership. So transfer of that information is now managed electronically through the New South Wales Land Registry Services. So it's not quite as exciting, but it's still being recorded. So what do we actually have? We had 50 archive boxes of files from 1907 to 1939. And the files were in the original folders, but unfortunately most in poor condition. So it was not really practical to make them available. However, for preservation purposes, we did microfilm them and we later scanned them. But unfortunately, there were no lists or complete indexes. So it's been kind of starting from square one. So this is an example of the type of information and the look of it. This is actually the very first Notice of Transfer. It's got a little one in the top right-hand corner. That was our first one on the 1st of October 1907. Sutherland Shire was incorporated in 1907, so we have that first one for the first year. What you might notice is that it's handwritten, and most of the very early ones that we have are handwritten. So immediately, almost the first one, we had a bit of difficulty in actually transcribing the information, and there's also a lot of crossing out and notations, which is great, but it takes a bit of time to work out what's what. Having said that, of course, we actually have notations which are really interesting. These are a couple of examples of what the sort of thing that we're getting, which is sort of information outside the scope of the notice, which says that the lots have been being resided on, and also little hand-drawn maps as well, which is also a terrific source of information. So we're finding that the information that we're getting is really quite exciting. The link also to the rate books is excellent because we have assessment numbers which link from both the notice of transfer to the rate book, and you can see that here with the highlighting there on the numbers 1362. These are the assessment numbers, so that once you have an assessment number, you can go through the rate book, which we have that coverage, and find the actual annotations and more information about the land and where it's situated. So what did we want to do with this information? We definitely wanted to record it in our Recollect database, which we had set up for quite a while now. And so basically what was on the form in the way of entry, name, allotments, addresses, that sort of thing, were all transferred and put into fields on the template, because Recollect is template driven. So we created a template specifically for the notice of transfers, and we recorded all of the information that was on the piece of paper, as well as setting up a little area for notes and also administration, so that we could keep a track of what we've been doing. And also we wanted to create collections, because the actual groupings become a collection in themselves, so that it gives another way of accessing that information. So pretty much we spent a lot of time working out what needed to go into it. So it's quite a complicated form, but it actually allows for us to use those fields if we don't fill them straight away, which is another one of our issues as to how much information we should be putting in the record. This is what it actually looks like when it comes up onto the Recollect screen. And you can see here, this is each of the notice of transfers across the top, and then you can also access them as collections. We haven't done a great deal as yet, but there's been about 1,000 that we've uploaded. We've not yet made it available to the public because it's still pretty much a work in progress, but we'll probably review that shortly once we've made a few more decisions about access and how we're going to make people aware of it. And also, one of the issues was, well, how much information do we put in? And as you can see, all of the forms are actually available, so people could actually transcribe them themselves. It was getting the link into the document that was kind of the one that we wanted to nail. So basically at the moment, we're probably just filling 2 or 3 of those fields. And then probably later, at a later date, what we'll do is we'll get some help. So I guess that becomes our where to now. We'll actually tighten up all of the procedures of how we're going to do it. We have to group our records, and basically what we will do is probably come up with a set of procedures and hopefully encourage some of our staff to take it on as a project. So it's very exciting. It's got some great information, and we're really looking forward to making it live sometime soon. Thanks very much.
know, I was just seeing whether Helen was speaking. I didn't actually want to interrupt her. Hello, Helen.
No, I'm not hearing anything till just now.
Okay, yeah, we dropped out of the internet. We will all watch your recording online because it sounded like the people online had a fabulous time. So the recording will go on. My apologies. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you.
It happens.
I love technology. Okay, I think that's, yeah. Oh, and Helen, if you could unshare, please. Thank you. Really sorry you missed it.
Oops. Yeah, yeah. Right.
Already open. You
shrunk it. You shrunk it. Did I? Oh, yeah, I have two.
Just going to do a quick share. Okay, that was in the browser, wasn't it? Can't I see it?
Share the entire screen. It's because you're using the browser.
Oh, of course it is.
And then you select on to.
Okay, I'm literally not seeing the PowerPoint.
Let's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Then we'll do that. Then
It's gone. It's not showing online.
It's not showing at all.
It was until you put it in slide mode.
Okay, we might go out of slide mode then.
Yeah.
It's gone again, just to confirm.
Yeah. I mean, as in we can't see it online.
Okay.
Good now.
I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah.
I hate technology. Okay. My name is Andrew Allen. I work here at Campbelltown Library, and today my topic is Fisher's Ghost. So some libraries form a part of an area that is synonymous with something famous. With us, it's Fisher's Ghost. That's our main thing. So this year is the 200th anniversary of the Ghost, so we expect to be really busy, particularly later in the year when all of the anniversaries come about. Fisher's Ghost is regarded as Australia's most famous ghost, so we certainly don't argue with that. I've been interested in the story myself. I used to read about it as a kid in books, and little did I know I'd be working at Campbelltown Library later on. The story has been featured in lots and lots of books and plays, films, and countless documentaries over the years. And Campbelltown Library celebrates the story with the Fisher's Ghost Festival, which happens in November of every year. So who was Fred Fisher? I'll make this very, very brief because I haven't got much time because it's a long story, but he was a convict from England who settled at Campbelltown. He was murdered by a man named Worrell, and a man named John Farley claimed to have seen his ghost a few months after his disappearance. So the ghost was pointing to the creek where his body lay and was subsequently found. So the ghost of Fred, as we call him affectionately, is celebrated today through the Campbelltown's Fisher's Ghost Festival. So some of the things that we do in the library, so we do regular Fisher's Ghost walking tours. So we often run them with council staff and the Visitor Information Centre. So the route mostly follows the main street where all the action happened all those years ago, which often creates a problem with noises because it's the busiest part of Campbelltown. So we've got to battle noise all the time. And it ends at St Peter's Churchyard, usually at dark. So I start the tours late in the afternoon for the atmosphere. So I make my tours suitable for all ages. If there's children involved in the tour, then I will sort of tone it down a bit with the gruesome parts of how Fred Fisher was murdered. I tried a night tour, but there are WH issues associated with that, of course. And I compile a handout for every tour that I do. That's sort of common with any walking tours that I do. People love to get a handout afterwards. We create videos. There's me on the left there with a student, university students. We get lots of university students and HSC students wanting to make videos about Fisher's Ghost, which is, fun. The image on the left is from a documentary created by a student, which went on YouTube. And the video on the right was produced by council to promote last year's Fisher's Ghost Festival. So I had to display my very poor acting skills, and if I had the time I'd play the video, but I don't have the time. We've got a blog. We've had a blog here that we contribute to. We've had it for over 10 years now, and a lot of the posts on there are to do with Fisher's Ghost. A number of the titles I've actually got featured there that we have used. So posts include stories about John Farley, who saw the ghost, a comprehensive manuscript recently serviced on the story, and information on what sites still exist today. And one post was about Fisher's sister Louisa and a photo sent to us from a relative, and that's pictured there on the left. So that photo is the only known photo we have of one of Fred Fisher's relatives. We've got the Fisher's Ghost Writing Prize that we help organise. The prize is a creative writing competition open to everyone who lives, works or attends school, including university or TAFE in the Campbelltown local government area. So the library, in partnership with Westwards, hosts creative workshops throughout the year as part of the Fisher's Ghost Writing Prize. The winners and highly commended recipients are announced at a publication launch ceremony at HJ Daley Library, so here, during the Fisher's Ghost Festival. So the 2025 competition drew a record number of more than 140 entrants responding to the theme of Down the Road. This photo features the winners of the 2025 Writing Prize and pictured amongst our mayor and library manager. We present Fisher's Ghost in the media. On the left there is me on Channel 10 a couple of years ago. It was the most nerve-wracking thing I've ever done in my whole life. I prepared for about weeks and weeks in advance and was on TV for about 5 seconds, literally 5 seconds. But I got through it. And the one on the right-hand side is me with someone from the Daily Telegraph. That was at the end of last year, traipsing through the cemetery of a night, answering all the questions that he had about Fisher's Ghost. So if my WHS section of council knew about that, they'd die. I never told them that I was walking through a cemetery in the night time. We often do displays of objects related to Fisher's Ghost. Often this is for the Heritage Festival or History Week or any anniversaries that come up. This year we'll have a big display being the 200th anniversary. In the photo I've got there, this photo shows a display during last year's Fisher's Ghost Festival to promote the festival. We had items displayed which included the Fisher's Ghost Festival Princess Cup, posters and various newspaper articles. So we collect obviously a lot of things to do with Fisher's Ghost. Our collection contains a number of items related to the story that we have received as donations or that we have actively sought. So some of these things include, and I've got them up there on the screen, the Legend of Fisher's Ghost vinyl record. That's a beauty. The Fisher's Ghost film poster from the 1924 film directed by Raymond Longford. The Miss Princess Cup. Letters to and from the Fisher family. So pictured is a letter from the Registrar of the Supreme Court to Fred Fisher's mother. So we're very lucky to have the letters. And photographs related to the story. Of course, there's no photographs of Fred Fisher. We often get asked, do you have a photo of him? But this was 1826, pre-photography, of course. And we also have something called a ghost post in our collection. And this is a really, really long story. I won't go into it. But it was a post from an earlier version of Fisher's Ghost Bridge. It's not the original one from 1826, but when we do school tours, we don't tell the kids that. We just say, oh, yeah, it's from the old Fisher's Ghost Bridge. Also, a number of books and articles are in our local studies collection. One that we were lucky to receive was an unpublished manuscript called Call Not Tomorrow Thine, one of the most comprehensive accounts of the story, and that's available on our website. We have a podcast here that we do, Curious Campbelltown, it's called. It's been running since 2023. And one of our Curious Campbelltown podcast episodes focused on the Fisher's Ghost story. This was local author and former newspaper editor Jeff McGill, who has a strong interest in the story and shared his knowledge in our interview. Reflecting the interest from the community in this story, this episode had the most hits of any of our podcast episodes. And the story was also featured in a recent episode that I did called Ghost Talk. So people love ghost stories, and particularly the Fisher's Ghost story. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Next up is Samantha.
Yep, I'm here.
Oh,
Can
great.
you all hear me?
Yes.
Yep, I'll just
Yep,
share
we
my
can.
screen. Oh, sorry, I'll just have to wait for you to stop sharing before I can share mine.
Oh, yeah. I can see that. Couldn't do it from the back, that's all.
Didn't see that.
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Should be right now.
Thank you. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. Let me just bring that up. Can you all hear me okay and see okay?
Yeah.
Yep. So, hi everyone. I'm coming to you today from Parkes, New South Wales, about 5 hours west of Sydney. And my talk is on celebrating the dish, so bringing together local history and film buffs. This is an event that we did in October last year here at Parkes Library. So a bit of background, we run a regular film night here once a month on a Friday night. It was brought to my attention that the 25th anniversary of the release of the movie The Dish was coming up. And because a lot of this movie was filmed locally, it was suggested that we would look at doing an event in celebration of the anniversary or screen the movie at our regular film night. So the initial idea was to combine our regular monthly film night with the anniversary of the release of The Dish, which happened in October 2020, 2000 rather. So like I said, parts of the movie had been filmed locally at Parkes' very own radio telescope, about 20 k's down the road from Parkes. And a lot of the locals had been involved in filming the movie. So this was a really great opportunity to bring members of the community in to share their reminiscences, and also to bring out items from our local studies collection, which we don't usually put on public display. So the planning of the event. So ultimately, we decided to show the movie and make the night a bit of an event. So the event would include having people involved with the film come and share their experiences with the audience. So to get these people coming in, we did a social media call out for locals who'd been involved in the filming. And we also reached out to the CSIRO Murrayang Parkes radio telescope, which is known locally as the Dish, as well as Park Shire councillors for any potential participants. From that social media call out, we had one response. We had 2 from the telescope and 1 local councillor who'd also been involved in the filming. In terms of the format of the night, we decided to alter it slightly and start 1 hour earlier than we normally would, in order to accommodate the guest speakers. And some of those guest speakers were bringing along photographs or other mementos from their time working on the film. And we also brought out items from our library's local studies collection to pop on display at the event. And this is just some photos of some of the things that we had on display, a bit of a selection. We also had these on display in the library prior to the event. So we've got some photos of the dish, the site of the dish before it was actually constructed. A very early photo about 1969, complete with sheep. I can confirm there are still sheep out there. And down on the bottom, we have the first director of the telescope, which was John Gattenby Bolton. We also had 2 documents that we have in our local studies collection on display that are press releases. One was related to the construction of the telescope and the other one related to the filming of the moon landing. Next slide. So promoting the event. We promoted it on the library's Facebook page and other key Facebook pages, including Parkes community information pages, as well as those for neighbouring areas and some of the Parkes history Facebook pages that exist. We also did a write-up promoting the event, which was featured in the local newspaper, some in-house library advertising, and like I mentioned before, we also had a display of photos and other ephemera from the construction of the dish itself in the library, which elicited a lot of interest from patrons. So this is just some promo posters that we created for the event that were shared on Facebook and in the library as well. On the night of the event, so numbers were lower than we would have liked for the event, with some of the regular film night attendees choosing not to attend because they'd already seen the movie. Despite this, we still ended up with 3 excellent guest speakers. One was the current director of the telescope who worked at the telescope at the time of the filming. He wasn't the director at that stage, but he had some very interesting things to share with us. We also had a local who had worked at the telescope at the time and was employed as a stunt double on the film, which was very interesting. And our third guest speaker was one of our local councillors here in Parkes who worked as an extra on the film with his family. So it was really interesting to hear from them. After hearing from our guest speakers, the attendees then had the chance to look at some of our historic photos from the construction of the telescope before we screened the movie. And when we screened the movie, it was quite hilarious. When 2 of our guest speakers spotted themselves in the movie. So that was really, really fun. And just to finish, just a couple of photos from the night. So thank you. I apologise if I've spoken at breakneck speed, but thank you for listening.
Thank you. Juliet's next. Oh, sorry.
No, the day's right. But do you know if this is loaded? It is loaded?
would be, yeah. Yeah.
I do have a USB. That's easier.
Yeah.
Would you rather that?
Yeah, if you want.
Oh, okay. Whatever. Okay, so talk me through somebody, or somebody's happy. Okay. Continue. Where's it gone? If it's easier to find the loaded one, I'm happy for somebody to come and do that. It's my USB here. I'll talk, you can drive. So I'm not Juliet, I'm Jo from Wollongong. Juliet, unfortunately, is not well today, so I'm taking over. So the title of our talk is Collecting Strategy to Document and Reflect LGBTQIA+ Stories in Wollongong. So we, another part of our library team, the Community Connection and Learning team, got a grant through ALIA in connection with the Department of Home Affairs Office for Social Cohesion. So they wanted to promote social cohesion in communities in Australia, and ALIA put their hand up and said, well, libraries are a great place to do that. So, yeah, let's get together and administrate them through ALIA. So that team asked the local studies team to be involved in... Yeah? Oh. Sorry, we're just getting the screen up. So we decided to call our part of it Out in Wollongong. Not sharing? Not sharing. Where's my sharing over there?
Go into Edge and go share screen.
Not there?
Not there.
Not there? Into where? You can drive. I'll keep talking. So we decided to have two strategies. One was to have a scanning day, inviting community members to bring items in, photos and other things in, memorabilia relating to that community. And the second thing, thank you, was to interview people for our oral history project, which is called Illawarra Stories and has a standalone website where we have over 200 stories, I think now. So what we did then was we had a look at what we already had. And on the catalogue, when we put in LGBTQI+, we found we had books, but not hardly any pictures. So we went to our, we have a negative collection that was given to us by the local newspaper, the Illawarra Mercury. They gave us all their negatives and photos from mid-1960s to the 1990s. And they included these day books and index books that we could look up to find photos. So just thinking about how we use different terms at different times, the term that they used was homosexuality. So we looked up that and we found some photos, which got the ball rolling. So we found the negatives, we scanned them and we put them up. So we found things like 1998, rehearsing for Mardi Gras at Checkers nightclub car park in Wollongong. So then we had our scanning day on a Saturday, and we had some people come in with some great collections with posters, photographs, badges, all sorts of things like that. We advertised it on our social media. We had great media coverage in the local media about that. Calls and emails beforehand asking questions. We did have a bit of pushback through social media about the project. But this is an image from the Illawarra Flame, which is our local magazine, free magazine on the day, of some people that brought things in. So there wasn't a huge turnout to that, but some of the things, but a lot of quantity that they had. We got things from the Gals Choir spelled QUOIR, and from ACON, the AIDS Council. And this is a picture of the first candlelight memorial for victims of AIDS in Crown Street Mall, Wollongong, 1996. But then the next day, or the following Monday, Wollongong's first drag queen turned up with a suitcase of memorabilia. So that was gold. Lots of interesting things in this battered old suitcase. So he is Grant Barnes, aka D.D. Lamar, and he's going to participate in the oral history part of the project. The next day after that, another person turned up with boxes and portfolios of materials relating to events and arts health venues. And then the following day, have I got the right one? I might have jumped ahead. Anyway, yeah, that one. So the two sort of outputs that we're working on is the Illawarra stories. So we've set up the page on the website for Out in Wollongong. And we've got some people lined up to interview. We've got some written interviews for people that didn't want to speak in person but wrote about their memories. And I'm also doing some training with Rainbow League, which is a youth group at our local youth centre. And they're going to do just really short interviews using their phones of people in that community. They all have to be over 18, the interviewers and the interviewees, just for safety and that. So that's all happening. Oh, she's got an 11th slide. Naughty Juliet. Anyway, and the other thing is Illawarra images. So it's increased the number of images of that community in our collection. And yeah, that fulfills the purpose of the diversity and inclusion that we're wanting to have in our image and library collection.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
And then Catherine.
So I'll just get it set up. Oh, okay. Oh, radio.
I was thinking it was my one.
Oh, okay.
That's Andrew's one.
Thank you. Just get it again. Oh, it's already showing, so we're already good. Okay, and does it have to be, can we do it in the slideshow or try it? Excellent. I'd love that. My notes are underneath. Although
we completely lose it if you go slideshow.
Absolutely, that's no problem. Yeah, that's a good idea. All right. It's okay. I might grab the notes off.
If I can't read them, it's not sharing.
You'll have to start again. Start again. Yeah. Makes sense. So share screen. Share the whole lot. Yep. Good. I think we're on. So so thanks for giving us the opportunity to present today. I'm Catherine from the Northern Beaches Council Library Local Studies section of the Northern Beaches Library. And yes, so I'm Catherine Day, I'm the Digital Asset Officer with Local Studies and Family History there. And there's about 6 of us in the team. And today we're going to present We Belong Trail Tales. And it was about collection development and partnering with other Northern Beaches Council teams to create contemporary, diverse and interactive collections. So where it all began is the Library Strategic Plan. From the Northern Beaches Plan, our goals were to document, preserve, share, showcase and celebrate Northern Beaches' unique local culture, history, living cultures and First Nations heritage, while celebrating pride in place and encouraging collaboration with council teams. So that was one of our main goals. Our current collections were lacking in diversity, which provided an opportunity for the team, the local studies team, to actively collect contemporary stories representative of our local community by partnering with another team in council, the community engagement team. And it became clear that we had common goals and complementary skills. So there were a lot of milestones along the way. The community engagement team had applied successfully and received a New South Wales government grant for a community-led storytelling project with the goal for community members to identify, record and tell their stories, with council helping to showcase them to the community. The We Belong Intercultural Community Leaders program aimed to strengthen connection and belonging and enhance social and cultural inclusion on the Northern Beaches. The program helped develop skills and abilities of the participants in cultural advocacy, community engagement, and leadership. Local Kind Northern Beaches is a local community-based organisation supporting vulnerable and disadvantaged people on the beaches. And they were selected as one of the leading groups and one of the leaders with their deep ties with the local community. So from there was training, testing. Essentially, once the collaboration with the community engagement team was complete and with Local Kind and the participants had been established, the fun began, and we used our technical expertise to practically train members of the community and engagement teams on how to set up and operate the local studies oral history equipment to capture stories in high quality archival formats, which was an incredible addition to the community-led storytelling project. We created user-friendly manuals to facilitate the process off-site as well. So the equipment moved, the people moved, the stories were told, and yeah, it was really exciting to be involved in. A lot of the information, a lot of the storytelling and capturing of the community-led recordings took place in Storytelling Pod 1, which is at the Manly Library in Manly, level 1. And then once the recordings were done as well, there was lots of editing in Auditions or an Adobe program by the local studies team. So we loaned out the equipment to the participants. We downloaded and edited the recordings, so the local study staff used our expertise to do that, and a specific We Belong Trail Tales collection was created on our public-facing local history website, History Hub, which is Recollect as well. So that was really exciting to see Helen's presentation actually in relation to those templates in that collection, and everybody else's as well. Audition software was used for the sound editing, ensuring all recordings flowed seamlessly, with acknowledgement of country and accompanying music added into each. The project launched in Harmony Week 2025, launching on Sunday the 16th of March at the Tram Shed Narrabeen, which is a historical site on the Northern Beaches, and it was opened with a smoking ceremony and cultural performances. That was very, very special. So this is just a screenshot of our local history site, History Hub, and the QR code takes you to the landing page for the collection. I'll just click over on my own. The local history team used innovative tools within History Hub to create audio files with profile pictures that showcased a picture of each person's special place of belonging when clicking play, along with transcripts and oral history items to showcase the collection. So it was the project was to capture stories from the community, diverse stories from the community and their connection to a special place on the Northern Beaches, and the meaning that it had to them. And from capturing those recordings, we were able to create this accessibility on the local history website. So QR codes were designed to promote the diverse stories within the actual Northern Beaches environment. And the community engagement team had QR code markers installed at iconic locations across the Northern Beaches, with the landscape linked to specific audio recordings on History Hub. So that's an example of the posters or the placards that were put up with the QR codes as well. And this is an example of how they look within our History Hub site and within Recollect. There is a picture of a person's special place, and they're recording and recounting and reminiscing about their special place on the Northern Beaches. And so you can imagine it was quite powerful having those within the environment. I'll just see if I can play this. So yes, that was Jeanette. She's from Colombia, beginning her story. The audio format appeared at the top of the item, also creating accessibility when people were scanning the QR codes that were specifically designed for mobile use. And the QR codes were installed for up to 3 months with an end life for the project for the community engagement team. However, the material collected is now archived and showcased permanently in our permanent archive, available for the public to access in the future. So that's one of the successes of it, I would say. And just some more images there of the person or the place with the play button, and that's how it sort of displays on History Hub. There were some challenges involved with the community-led project. Often participants were restricted by work or family commitments. However, the passion showed by the community leaders ensured that all content was delivered at a high quality, on time, and with our team being able to be flexible and offering advice on how to best achieve outcomes. So it's a really beautiful collaboration. It was a wonderful project to be involved in. There was over 1,449 views recorded on History Hub at the time over the 3-month period. And an outcome was also for our team in the community engagement team is actually a successful collaboration of now up to 5 new projects this year being considered. And at the moment, we're working with them on the next, which is disability storytelling. Whilst the local studies team will always have its own projects, as we all know, and goals to achieve, the collaboration within council with other business units has provided a wonderful opportunity for local studies to expand our collection of diverse stories and create deeper local ties with council and community, but the community essentially. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Okay, it's
Okay, so this afternoon, before we have our next guest speaker, I just want to introduce Joy Silverman, who is the Campbelltown Library Manager.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us here on Darrell land at Campbelltown City Library, the H.J. Daley Library. Here at Campbelltown, we have a really strong commitment everyone's story matters, whether you arrived in Campbelltown this morning or whether you're part of our First Nations community, your story matters. And so I'm really proud to be able to host this meeting here today. And also I'm super proud of the work that the team here does. So I'd just like to acknowledge the work of Andrew, Michael and Bess, who put together today, and for the work they do each and every day in this area. And to acknowledge the work of all of you in the field of local studies. I think it's one of, look, from a manager's perspective, a local studies team does double time in the library, right? Because they have such real depth of knowledge and community engagement, but they're also the team that probably does service back into council internally the most. So I'd like to acknowledge that here today, that, that you're, even if you don't realise it, the value of what you do is like a 360-degree dimension story. So thank you very much and enjoy your afternoon. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Do we have Lynette here?
Yep,
Yes.
I'm here.
Oh, great, Lynette. Okay, so just make you here before I introduce you. This is Lynette Plenderleaf. Did I say that correctly?
Perfect.
Lynette is from the Australian Citizen Science Association. She is the chapter chair for New South Wales. So this association seeks to advance citizen science through collaborative programs and sharing of knowledge. And Lynette is going to talk more to that this afternoon. Thank you, Lynette.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Let me share my screen. I have a presentation for you, which I think means that I won't be able to see anybody anymore. So do shout out if you need to stop me or anything else for any reason. Thank you for having me today. I am indeed from the Australian Citizen Science Association, the New South Wales chapter, no less. But actually, I am not the chair anymore. I might have been when you originally requested a chat with you, but I'm now a committee member. I'm just north of Sydney on Darkinjung country. I have a PhD in ecology and I work as a casual academic and a science communicator. I have lots of professional experience in community engagement, of which citizen science is a really valuable tool. That's where a lot of my experience with citizen science comes from. And I'm a specialist in human dimensions of conservation. So that means that I do a lot of almost social sciencey stuff. My background is in pure ecology science type stuff, but a lot of the work that I do now is about government policy or about human behaviours, human interactions with nature, human connection with nature, engagement with conservation science from a community perspective. Then in my spare time, I'm on the ACSA committee, the Australian Citizen Science Association, New South Wales chapter. So most states and territories have a chapter of the Australian Citizen Science Association, but we also have a national body that oversees what we do and supports what we do, and also sort of functions in its own right as well. They have meetings and we send a representative to those meetings as well. So we have a good handle on lots of things that are happening around the country, as well as locally in New South Wales. The other thing I like to do in my spare time is citizen science. And we'll talk more about what makes citizen science a thing in a minute, but a lot of what that means is that anybody can take part in citizen science. So you can be a scientist and still take part. So I do that too. And I'll talk more about what I do and what I enjoy later as well. I also ran a program for the Victorian government, which isn't totally relevant here, but I thought I would give you a bit of an idea of the sort of projects that might exist. Down in Victoria, where I was living a few years ago, the wet map program was seeking to investigate the impacts of environmental water. So that's where, our rivers, the Australian rivers have people have tabs on how much they can have. So they have irrigation. There's an amount allowed for agriculture and for industry and those sorts of things. But there's also a small percentage set aside for ecological purposes. And what that normally looks like is areas that are natural wetlands, although they might dry up a little bit because a lot of that water is taken out of the system earlier upstream. They might flood those. They have artificial flooding regimes where they flood those wetlands, which enables a lot of the wildlife that rely on those intermittent flooding events to persist. And I was part of a team that was testing the efficacy of that. And a lot of that is really great stuff that really good scientists from the department, the state government department, would go out to test. But a lot of those sites that we were really interested in how well they were faring with and without environmental water were on private properties and places where 8 hours from the office, 9 hours from the office, 3 hours in between, quite remote properties that potentially held a source of great information about the effects of environmental water. And so private landholders were actually a really important part of the data collection process, because they were able to assess what was going on their properties at times that the professional scientists that were part of the program couldn't have got there. So people walking their dogs were able to collect data for us. People popping down the shops, walking the kids to school, all those sorts of things were able to collect data for this project. And so we were able to really bulk out the data set much better than we would have done using the professional scientists alone. So citizen science is not a name that I am totally on board with, but it's kind of the one we've got. It's how people started to describe it maybe only 20 years ago. I prefer the term community science because, as you might be able to guess from my accent, I wasn't always a citizen of Australia. I am now, but I wasn't always. And you don't need to be a citizen to take part. And also I'm a scientist and I also take part. So that's sort of, anyway, I think it's a bit of an exclusive title, but at the same time, language evolves how people use it, and we use the term citizen science. And so, we continue to use it anyway. And as an association, the Australian Citizen Science Association works on helping people to understand what that means and improving and refining the definition of citizen science, because lots of people, there's a bit of controversy. All these sorts of things take time to work out in science, and the difference between a community engagement project, a volunteer monitoring project, and a citizen science project are ridiculously nuanced and very difficult to define. So we work on that a bit as well. But the things that are common in citizen science programs is the data contributes to a science program, sometimes a project that is designed to use citizen scientists, like the wet map one that I worked on in Victoria. But also some projects don't exist yet. So a lot of citizen science programs collect a huge amount of data that then can be mined at a later date by scientists. So I've got some examples of that later, but what that means is that we can have massive data sets that then people that want to analyze those can access later if they, for example, went, there's an interesting species of invertebrate that I'd be keen to know the distribution of. They can then look at those data sets and find the answers to those within those collections. And that's what I mean by some projects don't yet exist, and a lot of citizen science contributes to the data sets that don't necessarily have a purpose when they're contributing to them, but will almost certainly come in useful in the future. They can range from very small local projects. So the program that I worked on in Victoria, we had maybe only, I think we had 50 people contributing to, but of course they spread across northern and central Victoria and were absolutely vital to the success of the program. And then there are large global projects in which hundreds of thousands of people take part, and we'll talk more about what those look like later. Like I said earlier, it's a fabulous engagement tool. So one of the things that citizen science does, and one of the reasons we were using it for the wet map program, is that it enables people to connect with the environment around them, in whatever that looks like. Sometimes that looks like fungi, for example, and people's frogs in their ponds on their private properties. But sometimes that even looks like space study, black holes and what have you. And people, the whole point of citizen science is that anybody can take part. And that means that people that haven't necessarily taken the time to study black holes before, which if you're anything like me, you probably haven't either, but that gives you an access to those sorts of things to engage with them that you wouldn't otherwise before. So so often it's used by local organizations to involve people in something that they might not have noticed that they want to raise awareness of. And sometimes it's gamified. So some gamification is where you create a competitive element of something, and sometimes people get addicted to the online citizen science stuff, like looking for black holes and things, and you can score points for how many ancient galaxies you've identified and things. And yeah, you'll have to forgive me. I am an ecologist and a conservation scientist, and consequently a lot of my examples are nature-based, but citizen science extends to the medical fields, to astronomy, to literally any element of science you can imagine. So I tried my best to cover them all, but I don't know a huge amount about some of the ones that are outside of the realm of wildlife science. So I was talking about how the Australian Citizen Science Association works hard to refine definitions of citizen science, and the ACSA has produced a list of best practice guidelines, but other best practice guidelines exist as well. And I think that the term is often the term citizen science is often used by organisations that don't necessarily adhere to the terms of best practice. But again, like I said, language is about how we use those terms, and so maybe that's not important. But ultimately, what I look for as a practitioner is that citizen science will generate data for actual science. So like I said, even if those projects don't exist yet, it still has to be scientifically sound data. Generally speaking, citizen science should benefit both science and society. So people should enjoy taking part. It should be part of the rich educational engagement of the world that people live in. They should enjoy the process, as well as collecting data at the same time. And maybe oftentimes communities benefit from citizen science as well, like in terms of, obviously it's a great educational practice as well as an engagement tool, but it can lead to, for example, programs that look at water quality. It may lead to policy change and things that improves water quality for that community. So that can be really important. One of the things that we're really keen should happen is that the participants of citizen science get feedback and acknowledged. So not only do they get a thank you when papers are published, when scientific papers are published in journals, those acknowledgements should state that the data were collected by citizen science, and that the people that participated, the citizen scientists, are able to access that science as well and read that paper and really enjoy that full part of the scientific process. And citizen scientists can be engaged in any part of that process, not just the data collection. Sometimes people publish papers as citizen scientists in collaboration with professional scientists. But any of that should be open to citizen scientists, and they should be involved in the whole process, whether or not they're only involved in a small part of it. A well-designed citizen science project should have data collection designed as a process for which citizen scientists collect as clear and as useful data as professional scientists. So when you've got a well-designed project, that design takes into account that people should be taking part without any specialist knowledge or equipment, that they should be able to collect the data or write the paper, whatever part of the scientific process they're doing should be designed with that in mind, and any checks and balances and mitigation practices that are required to include people that don't have a scientific background or training, the design process should take that into account to ensure that scientific rigor, regardless of who's taking part. And again, the point of citizen science is that people can take part without any specialist training or specialist equipment. So that doesn't mean that they can't take part if they have got a specialist training, but it also means that children, adults with very little formal education, or people that don't even know the species that they're looking at can take part as well. So there's some really great examples, and it's very difficult for me to choose examples to go in here of successful projects. And by successful, I mean projects that have been published in scientific journals and using citizen science data. So here's a few of my favorite examples, though. Radio Galaxy Zoo is one of these black hole searching things, and I wanted to list the publications, but there were just so many that it wouldn't have made for a very good slide. So I thought I'd share with you the web page that then has a button to send you to the publications page, of which there are lots. And this was a really interesting project. NASA runs lots of these projects and CSIRO do as well. Things that nobody in the professional astronomy field knew of before, that are being uncovered by people sat at their computers. And that, for me, is what citizen science is all about. People being able to take part wherever they are, whatever their situation, whatever their circumstances and abilities, and being able to really contribute to the field of understanding of the world around us. Plants are a great example because, as with the example I told you at the beginning about the private properties, remote areas, those sorts of things, lots of plants have very small ranges, are very important to the ecosystems in which they might exist, but they might be also incredibly threatened. And people can come across plants that weren't known to be in existence in the first place to there's like scientific literature. They might not have been described by Western science. They might not. They might exist in places that have not been documented before, and all those sorts of things are really, really useful in citizen science. Fungi is a really, really good demonstration of how we know so little about the world around us. And there are projects such as Fungi Map, which looks at distributions of fungi, and there are there's so little, there are very few mycologists, very few professional scientists that study fungi, and so little that we know about them. Identifying from species is really difficult. And so fungi is perfect for citizen science. Mushrooms, the visible form of the fungus, the fruiting body that we see, might appear only briefly. And so, you know, when you're out walking your dog, you might see a mushroom one morning that hasn't been there before and won't be there in 4 hours' time, and then may not be there for another year or two. And so the community's access to that sort of information is really vital to our understanding of that sort of thing. So fungi lend themselves really well to citizen science. The little blue caterpillar-looking animal down there, if you're not familiar with it, is a nudibranch, which is a type of sea slug. And nudibranchs are used with nudibranch citizen science is used with great effectiveness across the world to study invasive species, to study climate change. They are quite short-lived animals, so they have a quick generation time. And they are very easy to spot and very easy to identify. That actually is not a particularly colourful nudibranch in that picture. So that's how great they are for citizen scientists to be able to spot them and log them. And so there's lots of really important science being done just through observations of nudibranchs around the world. And then the frog on the far right is the species that I did my PhD on. At the time I took this photo, that was known as the bleating tree frog. But I studied this frog all the way from Byron Bay down to Port Macquarie. And it's known to exist all the way down beyond the Victorian border. But it wasn't even known by Western science to be past the Victorian border until fairly recently, because this is a frog that only comes out when it rains an absolute heap. And so for years, nobody had documented the species just over the Victorian border because it only would call once or twice a year, and on the Victorian border, which is not particularly populated either. And so when I was doing my study, I had this feeling that about Coffs Harbour, the frogs that were north of Coffs Harbour were a little bit different to the frogs south of Coffs Harbour. And somebody else had said that they thought the Victorian population was different again. And one of the best ways to study frogs taxonomically, so to know the difference from one species to another, is through their calls. So all frog species have a unique call, and that is how they identify each other for mating purposes. So the females hear the male of their species calling and move towards him. And as humans, we study frogs through their calls, because that's how we can identify them much easier than trying to find them in the first place, because they're generally quite small, and also much better than disturbing them to identify them morphologically through the way that they look. Anyway, so based on that information, the Frog ID project that runs out of the Australian Museum in Sydney, they looked at the calls along the coast from Byron Bay through to the Victorian border, and discovered 3 unique call signatures from those populations of frogs. And then after some work with genetics and after some other morphological work, measuring them and that looking at their colours and that sort of thing, they discovered that actually what we were looking at was 3 different species of frogs. So we now have the robust bleating tree frog, the slender bleating tree frog, and the screaming tree frog. I think the 3 of them are called. And they have very subtle differences, but those things are potentially very important from a scientific perspective. And we couldn't have done that if the Frog ID program hadn't been able to have calls collected by people recording the frogs on their telephones, on their mobile phones, on their smartphones, collecting those calls, producing this massive data set that was very easy to then identify the call signatures of those frogs all the way from Byron Bay to Victoria. So that's a really cool project. So some of the other things that I like to talk about with citizen science, iNaturalist is an app that you can download, and I love it because it's really good way of, there's millions of records in iNaturalist of all sorts of plants, animals and fungi. But I personally like it because people help you identify stuff on there. And I don't know much about plants. And so I can upload a picture of a plant, and somebody that does know about plants can get in there and identify it for me. That's a really great one. WaterWatch is more chemistry based. And so there's lots of local versions of that. And like I said, NASA runs some pretty good ones as well. And CSIRO runs some similar things too. So you can just Google citizen science projects, and then citizen science projects plants, if that's what you're interested in, citizen science projects space, citizen science projects Wollongong, those sorts of things. Whatever you're looking for, Google is your friend there. There's also a platform called Zooniverse, which collects a lot of information about those projects. So you can get into Zooniverse and just see what's around if you just want to browse through them. And AXA, the Australian Citizen Science Association, is a really great way to hear about citizen science projects as well. We have a national newsletter. And if you're interested in more local things, you can also email the New South Wales chapter, and we can put you on the mailing list for that as well. And when new stuff comes out, when new projects get started and those sorts of things, as well as reviews of previous programs or long-standing programs, those are all available through AXA too. Locally, there's been some really amazing work done by the Nature Conservation Council with greater gliders, which are a forest marsupial that famously get missed on surveys by forestry workers who are looking to log the native forests. But citizen scientists have done a really good job of finding lots of greater gliders where they were thought to not be in existence, and they're an endangered species. And so protections were able to be put in place for the gliders as a result of the citizen science work in New South Wales. WaterWatch has lots of local projects through New South Wales. Again, community monitoring of water quality, really great sort of chemistry style thing. Sea Sex Census is run up and down the coast by various different organisations, and you can just Google Sea Sex Census, and there's one in Port Stephens coming up, and Sydney runs them as well. But yeah, there's lots of those around. And then BioBlitzes, which I haven't mentioned yet, but they're really exciting citizen science events where basically you get together and you just find as much stuff as you can. AXA ran a BioBlitz at the Awabakal Education Centre for the New South Wales launch last year, and we logged every plant and animal and fungus that we found on the Awabakal Education Centre grounds that morning. There's also some more international projects of which smaller organisations might take part. So City Nature Challenge is often run by local groups. So there'll be a Sydney City Nature Challenge and various ones. And again, you can just Google City Nature Challenge, and that takes part over a weekend in autumn. Actually, I think that must be coming up. But lots of local groups all around the world will have will run City Nature Challenge projects. And the Great Southern BioBlitz is a similar thing, but for the Southern Hemisphere. And again, lots of organisations and agencies will run a small version of that within their local area in October, and you can Google that as well. And then there's lots of global and online projects as well, things like the CSIRO projects and the NASA projects that anybody anywhere can take part, including in New South Wales. iNaturalist is an example of a global project that people take part in their own time, in their own space. And that's all I've got for you today. I'd love to take any questions that you have about citizen science in New South Wales or more broadly.
Do you have any questions? I just have one. If we're looking to like collect the information from some of these local projects for our collections, would it just be a matter of like reaching out to different local programs and seeing if they would share their reports and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So most, if not most citizen science, I don't know all of them obviously, but most citizen science projects, they have what they call open source data, which means that anybody can access it. iNaturalist is a really easy one. You can get on the iNaturalist website and go to their explore page and just collect the data yourself. BirdLife run a bird data, which is a similar idea, and bird data you can get in there and you can just look for the data yourself. Frog ID, I think if you want frog specific data, frog call data, you would have to contact them and ask them for it, because then they would have to extract it from the system. And sometimes that can be a bit onerous, but you don't know until you've asked. So depending on, Frog ID, we're more than happy to provide the project that I ran with the specific data around what I was looking at. And they're always happy to do that. But it can take them some weeks to months, depending on priorities and that sort of thing, depending on what else they've got going on. But generally speaking, the data are open access. That's part of the point of citizen science, is that anybody can collect the information and anybody can access the information as well. So depending on what sort of information you're after and what sort of platforms it was collected on or which program collected it, it's probably fairly easy to get hold of. Yeah.
Hey, thanks very much, Lynette. Is there any questions online? Any last? No, you've given us lots of things to look at, lots of links to go to.
Wow.
All right, thank you very much, Lynette.
My absolute pleasure.
This afternoon.
Thank you. Take care.
You.